He thought he was simply filling a vacancy in his household. Another uniform. Another face to keep the marble polished and the silence undisturbed. He never imagined that the young woman about to step through his door was carrying something he had tried to bury 30 years ago. A secret he believed the world had long forgotten. They say that a man's past is behind him. But the past does not stay behind. It moves quietly, patient, unhurried, until the moment it is ready to stand in front of you. When Harrison Cole first looked at her, this still, dignified young woman standing in his foyer, something shifted inside his chest. A recognition he couldn't name. Like seeing a face in a dream you can't quite remember upon waking, but know somehow that it mattered. What he did not know yet, what he could not possibly have allowed himself to know, was that the woman before him was his own daughter. The child he had walked away from before she ever drew her first breath. The child he had never gone looking for. Not once. Not in 30 years. Hello friends, welcome to our story. Before we dive in, please like this video and subscribe. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? We want to know. Now, let's begin. The morning moved slowly inside Harrison Cole's estate, the way all mornings did. Measured, controlled, the silence broken only by the soft hum of climate systems and the distant tap of Leonard's shoes on polished floors. Harrison sat behind his desk in the study, a stack of contracts fanned before him, his pen moving with the calm certainty of a man who had long stopped questioning his own decisions. His coffee sat at the edge of the desk. Cold. He hadn't noticed. Harrison Cole was 58 years old. A tall black man, broad-shouldered, silver-templed, with the kind of bearing that made rooms rearrange themselves around him when he entered. He had built Cole Acquisitions from a single leverage deal into a private equity empire that stretched across 4 continents. People said his name with care. Not reverence exactly. Something closer to caution. He lived alone in this house. 14 rooms. A staff of 4. And most of the time that was precisely how he preferred it. A gentle knock at the study door. He looked up. It was Leonard, his butler of 11 years, standing in the doorframe with his hands clasped behind his back, his expression carrying the particular weight of a man who had something to say and was choosing his words with great precision. Sir. Leonard's voice was even. Do you have a moment? Harrison set his pen down and gestured once toward the chair across from his desk. Leonard came in, but he did not sit. That alone told Harrison something. I've had word from the agency, Leonard said. They've confirmed a candidate for the household vacancy. She's available to begin immediately if you approve. Harrison studied him. In 11 years, Leonard had never asked permission to hire junior staff. He handled it. That was the arrangement. Is there a problem with the candidate? Leonard held his gaze for a moment, one beat longer than necessary. No, sir. No problem at all. Pause. I simply thought you'd want to be present when she arrives. Harrison said nothing. He looked at the man who had run his house through 3 business crises, 2 lawsuits, and one very quiet breakdown that neither of them had ever named aloud. Leonard was not a man given to unnecessary ceremony. Fine, Harrison said at last. What time? This afternoon, sir. 3 o'clock. Harrison nodded once and reached for his pen. Leonard turned toward the door, then paused, just briefly, as though something had snagged at the edge of his thoughts. Then he walked out, his footsteps steady and unhurried, and the study returned to silence. Harrison stared at the contract before him. He had not read a single word of it in the last 4 minutes. He reached finally for his coffee. Took a sip. It was cold. He did not notice. The agency sent 3 names by noon. Leonard placed the folder on the corner of Harrison's desk without a word, the way he placed everything, precisely without intrusion, as though the act of setting something down was itself a form of respect. Harrison did not look up. He was on a call, his voice low and final in the way it always was when a deal was closing and the other party had already lost but hadn't been told yet. Leonard withdrew to the doorway and waited. It was a habit he had developed over 11 years, watching Harrison from the threshold of rooms, never fully inside them. There was a quality to the man that discouraged nearness. Not cruelty. Something more architectural than that. The way a monument discouraged touch. Not because it was fragile but because it was finished. Complete. Requiring nothing. And yet, Leonard had learned to read Harrison Cole the way sailors read weather. Not from what was present, but from what had quietly changed. The set of the jaw. The particular stillness that was not calm but containment. And lately the eyes. There was something in them these past weeks that Leonard had no precise word for. Not sadness. Harrison Cole did not do sadness. Something older than sadness. A weariness that lived below the surface of his composure, visible only in the seconds between tasks, between setting down the pen and picking up the phone, between ending one call and beginning the next. In those seconds, the man behind the empire showed himself briefly, and he looked tired in a way that sleep could not fix. The call ended. Harrison set his phone face down on the desk and pulled the folder toward him without being asked. He reviewed the 3 names with the same expression he gave balance sheets. Efficient. Detached. He paused at the 3rd. This one, he said. Leonard said nothing. He had already known it would be her. The apartment on Delmar Street was small but never chaotic. Angela Johnson ran it the way she had run her entire life, with a quiet insistence on order that had nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with dignity. The curtains were always drawn back by 7. The dishes never sat. And whatever the week had taken from them, the table was set properly for dinner, because Angela believed that how you kept your space was a declaration of how you regarded yourself. Nia had grown up understanding this without being told. She was ironing her uniform when her mother came in from the early shift, still in her nurse's aide scrubs, carrying the particular exhaustion of a woman who had spent 8 hours tending to other people's pain with no one to tend to hers. Angela set her bag down, filled a glass of water, and stood at the kitchen window for a long moment before she turned and looked at her daughter. The Cole estate, she said. Not a question. She had seen the agency letter on the counter that morning. It's good money, Mama. Better than the hotel. Angela was quiet for a moment in the way that meant she was not finished thinking. Then she moved to the small table and sat, folding her hands the way she did when something required her full care. Wealthy men, she said slowly, are not like other men. They don't see the people who keep their houses running. Not really. You'll be invisible to him, and that's fine. That's safe even. She paused. Just don't mistake the invisibility for safety. Those men, the powerful ones, the ones who've had everything arranged to their liking for too long, they carry a coldness that isn't personal. It's just what happens when a man stops being accountable to anyone. Nia nodded. She pressed the iron slowly along the collar of her uniform. She thought she understood what her mother meant. She didn't? Not yet. She arrived at 3 o'clock exactly. Leonard met her at the gate, a deliberate choice he had made that morning without fully examining why. Normally he sent the day porter. Today he went himself, standing in the pale afternoon light with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the rideshare pull up and a young woman step out with a single bag and the particular composure of someone who had learned early that first impressions were a form of armor. He recognized her before he was ready to. Not completely. Not in any way he could have explained to another person. But something in the angle of her face as she looked up at the estate, calm, unhurried, taking it in without being taken in by it, landed in Leonard's chest like a key finding a lock it had no business finding. He said nothing. He welcomed her, showed her to the staff entrance, gave her the orientation he had given a dozen others before her, his voice steady and professional throughout. He did not look at her eyes until he had to. When he did, he looked away quickly. Harrison was in the main corridor when they came through, a coincidence or what passed for one in a house where Leonard controlled most of the movement. He was heading toward the east study, a phone to his ear, mid-conversation, already elsewhere in the way powerful men were always already elsewhere. He turned at the sound of footsteps and saw her. The call continued in his hand. His mouth did not move. She was caramel-toned, dark-eyed, her natural hair pinned simply at the back of her neck, her posture humble without being small. She glanced up once, briefly, respectfully, and in that single moment something happened behind Harrison Cole's eyes that had not happened in 30 years. The phone call ended. He didn't notice. He was already somewhere else entirely. Somewhere older. Somewhere he had spent 3 decades making sure he would never have to return. Terrence Whitfield arrived the following morning in a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, driving himself rather than using a car service. A calculated informality, the kind of small power move he deployed the way other men deployed attorneys. He liked to appear relaxed in spaces where he wasn't supposed to be comfortable. It unnerved people. That was the point. Harrison received him in the east sitting room, not the study. Another calculation. The study was where real business happened. The sitting room said, "You are a guest, not a partner, and I have not forgotten the difference." They talked for 40 minutes about a port development tender they were both circling. The conversation was civil in the precise way that negotiations between rivals are civil. Every sentence carrying a secondary meaning, every concession offered with a hidden price attached. Harrison was sharp as always. Present as always. Mostly. Terrence noticed the moment it shifted. They were mid-discussion when the new maid moved through the far end of the corridor beyond the open doorway, quietly, efficiently, carrying a tray toward the upper rooms. Harrison's eyes moved to her for less than 2 seconds. But Terrence Whitfield had built his fortune on watching men in rooms, and 2 seconds was more than enough. He filed it away without reacting. After the meeting concluded and Leonard showed him out, Terrence sat in his car for a moment before starting the engine. He was not a man who believed in coincidence. Harrison Cole did not get distracted. Not by staff. Not by anything that wasn't a threat or an opportunity, and in Terrence's experience with a man like Harrison, those two things were frequently the same. He picked up his phone and called his assistant. "I need a background pull," he said. "New hire at the Cole estate. Female. Mid-20s. Pause. Full history." Quietly, he started the engine and pulled away from the gate, already thinking 3 moves ahead. Leonard had always believed that the truth had a patience that human beings lacked. It did not argue. It did not demand. It simply waited in the room until someone was ready to see it, and then it made itself impossible to ignore. He watched Nia work for 3 days before he allowed himself to be certain. It was not any single thing. It was the accumulation, the way she tilted her head slightly when she was thinking, the particular angle at which she held a tray, the unhurried quality of her movements in a large space, as though she understood instinctively that dignity was not about speed. Small things. Quiet things. Things that would have meant nothing to anyone who had not once, 32 years ago, spent a single evening at a company dinner seated 2 chairs away from a young woman named Angela Johnson, and found himself thinking afterward that she was the most quietly remarkable person he had ever encountered. He had not thought of Angela Johnson in years. He thought of little else now. Leonard was not a man who interfered. In 11 years he had maintained the precise boundary between loyalty and complicity, between serving Harrison Cole and covering for him, and he had never once crossed it. What he was about to do was not crossing it, he told himself. It was simply leaving a door ajar. He went to the storage archive in the east basement, the room Harrison never entered, where the household records went back decades. He found what he was looking for in a manila folder between 2 quarterly staffing reports from the early 90s. A photograph. A company event. Several faces formally arranged. Angela Johnson stood near the left edge, young and luminous, her eyes carrying the particular expression that Nia wore every single day. Leonard placed the folder on Harrison's desk. Beneath a contract. Slightly visible. Not obvious. Just enough. He found it on a Tuesday evening, the way men find the things that undo them. Not looking, not ready, reaching for something else entirely. The contract beneath it was a refinancing amendment that needed his signature before morning. He moved it aside and the manila folder came with it, sliding to the center of the desk with the quiet insistence of something that had been waiting. He almost set it aside unopened. He almost didn't look. He looked. The photograph was from a company event he hadn't thought about in over 3 decades. Faces he barely remembered, arranged in the stiff formality of an era before everything was digital and nothing was permanent. His own face was there near the right edge, younger, harder, not yet powerful but already certain he would be. He almost smiled at that. Then his eyes moved left. She was standing near the edge of the frame, slightly apart from the others, as though she had never quite decided whether she belonged in the room. Young. Luminous. Her eyes holding something that the camera had caught and the years had not diminished. A quiet, composed strength that sat just below the surface of her expression like current beneath still water. Angela. Harrison set the photograph down on the desk and did not move for a long time. Then, slowly, he reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and retrieved his phone. He pulled up the household staff portal, a system he had never once accessed before, that being Leonard's domain entirely. He found her file. Nia Johnson. 26 years old. Mother listed as Angela Johnson, née Williams. Port of record. He stopped reading. He set the phone face down on the desk the way he had set it down 3 days ago in this same room, when a young woman had walked through his corridor and something old and buried had moved in his chest. He understood now what it had been trying to tell him. He waited until morning to call Leonard in. Not because he needed the time to think. The thinking was already done, had been done somewhere in the long wordless hours between setting the phone face down and the first gray light appearing at the edge of the curtains. He waited because calling Leonard in the middle of the night would have been an admission, and Harrison Cole did not make admissions before he had arranged the facts into something that resembled a decision rather than a collapse. Leonard arrived at 7:15 as he always did. Harrison was already at his desk. "I need a full background and legal history run on the new staff member," Harrison said without looking up. "Nia Johnson. The board has requested enhanced security vetting on all household personnel with residential access. Standard protocol going forward." The silence that followed was precisely one beat too long. "Of course, sir," Leonard said. "I'll have it compiled by end of day." Neither of them acknowledged what the silence had contained. The file arrived at 4:30, placed on the corner of the desk with the same quiet precision Leonard applied to everything. Harrison waited until he was alone. Then he opened it the way a man opens something he already knows will cost him. Slowly, with the discipline of someone who has spent a lifetime refusing to let his face tell the truth before his mind was ready. It was all there. Birth certificate. Mother, Angela Christine Johnson. Father, listed as unknown. Date of birth placing Nia's conception in the precise window Harrison had spent 30 years not thinking about. A DNA ancestral record filed 3 years ago through a consumer genealogy service. A thread left hanging in a database attached to nothing, waiting for someone to pull it. He pulled it now. He read the confirmation twice. Then he closed the file and sat with his hands flat on the desk, very still, the way a man sits when the last exit has quietly closed behind him. Terrence called at 9 in the morning, which meant he had been holding the information since the night before, letting it ripen. That was his style. Never strike the moment you have the weapon. Make the other man feel the weight of what's coming first. "I'll keep this brief," Terrence said. "I think you know why I'm calling." Harrison said nothing. He had learned decades ago that silence was the most expensive thing a man could offer in a negotiation, and he had never stopped being in one. "Your new maid," Terrence continued, his voice carrying the particular warmth of a man enjoying himself. "Interesting hire, Harrison. Especially given the circumstances. A story like that, billionaire, secret daughter, 30 years of silence. That's not a business story. That's a front-page story. The kind that doesn't stay in the financial press." "What do you want, Terrence?" "A withdrawal from the port tender." Quietly. "By Friday." Pause. "In exchange for my discretion." Harrison looked at the window. At the pale morning light sitting on the garden he never walked in. At the life he had built around the careful elimination of everything that could not be controlled. "I'll be in touch," he said, and ended the call. He sat for a long moment. Then he pressed the intercom. "Leonard, send Nia to my study, please." She arrived in 4 minutes, standing in the doorway in her uniform with the composed stillness he had come to recognize as hers. Not nervousness, not deference, but a particular kind of readiness, as though she had grown up understanding that rooms could change without warning and it was best to be prepared. "Close the door," Harrison said quietly. "And please sit down." Something shifted in her expression. Faint, controlled. She sat. Harrison looked at his daughter for a long moment across 30 years of silence and a desk that suddenly felt like the smallest distance he had ever had to cross. "There is something I should have done a very long time ago," he said. His voice, for the first time in as long as Leonard could remember, had the old butler been present, he would have noticed, carried no armor in it at all. "And I need to ask you to hear me out before you decide what to do with what I'm about to tell you. You don't owe me that. I want to be clear that I know you don't owe me anything." Nia said nothing. Her dark eyes held his with an expression he couldn't yet read, and he understood, with a clarity that arrived like cold water, that he had no right to read it. "Not yet. Perhaps not ever." "My name is Harrison Cole," he said, "and I am your father." The silence that followed those words was the longest of Harrison Cole's life. Nia did not move. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on his face, and she did not give him the explosion he had braced for, or the tears, or the cold dismissal he would have deserved. She gave him something far harder to bear. She gave him time. A long, measuring quiet in which she looked at him the way her mother had always looked at difficult things, directly, without flinching, without the mercy of looking away. When she finally spoke, her voice was even. "I know," she said. Harrison went still. "I found the genealogy match 8 months ago." Her eyes didn't waver. "I took the job because I needed to see what kind of man you were before I decided whether you were worth the conversation." The room held them both in silence for another long moment. Then something moved across Nia's face, not forgiveness, not yet, nothing so simple or so swift as that, but the faint, careful opening of a door that had been sealed for 26 years. "I haven't decided yet," she said quietly, "but I'm still sitting here." Harrison nodded. It was the most he had been given, and he knew it was more than he had earned. He withdrew from the port tender that afternoon. He sent no explanation to Terrence, no negotiation, no countermove. He simply withdrew because for the first time in 30 years something mattered more than winning. 3 days later, the Coal Acquisitions Board convened for its quarterly review. Harrison attended the first 20 minutes, addressed the items that required him, and then did something no one in that room had ever witnessed. He excused himself. Leonard had set the small table in the east sitting room. The good china, the kind reserved for occasions Harrison had never previously felt he had reason to mark. Nia was already there when he arrived, still in her own clothes, not a uniform. She had made the tea herself. Harrison Cole sat down across from his daughter, and for the first time in 30 years, he had nowhere else he needed to be, and nothing left he needed to protect. This story moved you? Like this video and subscribe. Drop a comment below and tell us, did Harrison deserve that second chance or did Nia let him off too easy? We want to hear your verdict. We'll see you in the next one.